All right, what's up, you guys? Killing for company. My name's Kellen. This is part two of the Craig Zahler End of 22 series. Just like last time, for those who missed it, we had a very long discussion, so I kind of broke it up into 4 parts. This is part 2, and just like the first episode, I have an album that I want to talk about before we jump into the sort of back and forth between Zahler and myself. So in the background, we are listening to Critical Defiance. This is No Life Forms. The second full length, I believe, here by Critical Defiance, a Chilean thrash band. So out of all the releases that came out in 22, this maybe was one of my most anticipated. When I saw that sort of the preview, like the album artwork and whatever, pre-order went up, and found out there was going to be a new Critical Defiance record, probably like one of the most immediate like moments where I jumped on it and knew without even questioning that I wanted to pick it up. It's very different than Misconception, their first record back in 2019. This is almost like a crossover record. It's way more punk inspired. I think they had 2 new guitarists join the band. I guess the last 2 left, and 2 new guys came in, which probably dramatically affected the songwriting, which is why there's such a dramatic shift. Part of the appeal for Misconception for me was it was such a young band that was writing not just great songs, but like longer thrash songs, which I think is a challenge, right? They navigated that really well. Anyway, so when this record came around, I kind of was caught off guard, but nonetheless, I still think Critical Defiance is the best thrash band going on right now, no matter what country you're talking about, not just the Chilean scene, which has a tremendous thrash, sort of a group of thrash bands from that country unto themselves, but Critical Defiance is the best, and No Life Forms was my favorite thrash record. Probably competed with the Sadistic Ritual, but that record's not so clearly defined. This is unmistakably a thrash release. Like I said, a little bit more tightly wound, which is why I think the crossover sort of tag potentially works just as much. But nonetheless, No Life Forms, Unspeakable Acts, one of like 5 or 6 different Unspeakable Acts releases that could have potentially made it to my favorite of 22. Anyway, so I got that here playing in the background for you if you're interested in checking that out. Anyway, let's get to the Zahler interview. Thanks so much for watching, and here is part 2. Okay, you're up. Go for it, Craig.
Cool. So one of 3, let's say, metal adjacent things, though from a label that mostly does metal, and probably a nice cousin to the earlier Prog thing that you showed is, let's say, Helas. I'm just guessing on that, but there's an umlaut, so I'm going to choose not to ignore it. This is prog rock, space rock. There's definitely new wave of British heavy metal stuff for those who are really into that scene. And if Alan is watching this, I'm talking to you. There is a lot of Jameson Raid, and so Jameson Raid was like the one new wave of British heavy metal that I ever heard that seemed to incorporate very early Genesis progressive rock. Like the first album, actually before Peter Gabriel was there, that Trespass album, which is actually one of my favorites by Genesis. So they're from Sweden. The name of the album is Isle of Wisdom, and this is a really strong album. In terms of a sound, I'm gonna, like I mentioned Jameson Raid, and then this will be odd. At times I'm hearing a little bit of Heavy Load, certainly one of my favorite of the classic epic metal bands, and then I'm also hearing a fair amount of Styx. So Styx before Tommy Shaw was really kind of the other counterpart in doing the really poppy stuff. But I like Styx. That's not an insult, probably. You know, some listeners, you know, and viewers may find that to be insulting. But there is a good sense of like the pop hook, and getting a little more obscure in the prog world, Nidrolog. There's a little bit of that stuff as well. So you get a lot of personality with this singer, this Tommy Alexanderson, who's a lead vocalist and playing bass. The first thing, the Birth into Darkness, you get some twin guitar, a little bit along the lines of like the Wishbone Ash, very pretty, mellow kind of twin guitar. The vocalist has a pretty heavy accent, so it's got like that Euro feel to it. So that one, I think that the first two songs are both pretty good. And at that point, I was like, this wasn't as good as whatever it was that I sampled online. So I think I listened to a song or two and then bought it. And then it really, to me, jumps up quite substantially with the third one, which is the Earl's theme. And this has a bit of the swagger of like Nidrolog, where it's like, here are the melodies. We're going to sit with these. You're getting synths. The synth work throughout this album is excellent. I would say sort of alongside the vocals and then the twin guitar melodies, the synths are probably the best thing on this album. And they're giving you something that will certainly sound retro to people and probably kitschy to some people. They're doing like a horn fanfare at like 2 minutes. And also like a lot of like the chorale, like kind of pushing that sort of backing thing, reminding me almost a little bit of Magma in spots. Till we die. And then we get like just really like, and we will follow him until we die. So you'll get these like phrases that really stand out. I mean, I've only heard this album a few times. This was a late. I found this on some list, so this isn't something that I've lived with for a long time, but I can recall the melodies. And then you get like a really nice Wishbone Ash twin guitar thing at the end, and Hammond organ coming in, so you're getting a little bit that Deep Purple or, you know, ELP kind of sound. The next, so Earl's theme is a highlight. The next song, Inner Chamber, also a highlight. This is a little bit more the very pretty Canterbury side of prog rock. There's spots where I'm like, I'm not sure if this is a harpsichord or a harpsichord keyboard thing or a guitar. Like it's just pretty, and there's a nice delicate quality to it. You get like nice syncopation, and then they'll just jump to a straighter section. You get a number of time changes in this one, and it has like it feels very like a sequential song. Like this part happens, the straight part happens. Now at 450, we're gonna leap to like kind of a swishing hi-hat beat, and then you're gonna get like the monster drum fills for the arrival, and then a heavy guitar lick, like and it's like at 3 minutes, at 4 minutes 50 seconds, at 5:40, at 6:05, like going down, and it's linear like that. Like Satyricon, that one of my favorite songs by that band is that Tied in Bronze Chains, and this is that song. Like it's just a part after a part after, but they're all good and they flow. So that's a highlight. And then Illusions Gate. You've got a little bit of a light gallop here, a little bit sounding like the Priest version of Diamonds and Rust. And some really nice stuff where they're just like handing off the instruments. There's a refrain in it where he sings "You Must Run," and then the organ and a crack, like there's a combo organ crash part that's really nice. It's a good tune. Gallivants is a little less good. The next one, Stygian Depths. You've got a deep pocket 6/8, a little bit more bluesy, but with a lot of cool, clean guitar, and then it leaps into like a 4/4 with some kind of like almost like where they're adding some extra measures to make it a little bit more proggy. I refer to this when I talk about progressive rock as honk honk, which is like sometimes you'll have a riff or a lick or whatever, and it's just straight 4/4, 6/8 like a normal time signature, and they just want to make it a little odder. So it's like dun, 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 bump bump, and they'll just add in a couple of beats so that it goes out. So you've got a little bit of that in that one. But that song returns to 6/8 at the end. And then the lost in the ocean in the realm of the deep, really great. Like, so that song ends at its high point. And then the last song is certainly the closest thing you have to a metal song on this. And you get a lot of, it's like kind of a slow tremolo picking and kind of the most metal in feel. Just a really enjoyable album. And I've not uncovered all that is to be uncovered of this album. As I said, this is a fairly recent purchase, but enjoyable. And I'm going to look into others. It seems that maybe they have 2 other albums, and that maybe one of the others is rated a little higher than this, and the other's rated a little bit lower. Like, you know, I use rateyourmusic.com for like all of these sort of general checks, and in a way, I find it actually much more reliable than Metallum, because Metallum, you need to write a review. So there's the bias of the kind of person who will write reviews, which tend to be biased towards innovation, as opposed to just everyone who listened to the album reviewing it. So like, I find Rate Your Music is a little bit more accurate with stuff like this. And I digress. This album is enjoyable if you like progressive rock, and new wave or British heavy metal. Like, if you like Jameson Raid and progressive rock, this is a slam dunk for you. That's pretty obscure. But enjoyable. I'm going to check out more by these guys.
Please do. I love that band.
Do you know this album?
Yeah, so I have that album and I have their previous record, and I the last one, the previous record I enjoyed more. So, okay. But I think you're dead on. And in terms of bands that are doing prog rock in a way that I feel that a band like that even kind of belongs to this new wave of traditional heavy metal stuff going on right now. But
yeah, it's in there. Like, there's a lot of new wave of British heavy metal in there. I just think that's why I said, like, it's I feel it's adjacent for this. I'm not just talking about a prog album on this.
Sure, but it's to your point. It's so like Genesis, Hawkwind, Uriah Heep fans are gonna like.
Hawkwind, I should mention that. Yes, Hawkwind for sure. That was a mistake on my part not to bring them up. And the better, like, for me, the kind of more focused Hawkwind a little bit later, like the Hawkwind I like more. So that's there for sure.
But yeah, I really dig that band. So that's awesome. Okay, so I'll take over here. I have Ard. I think that's how it's pronounced. And Take Up My Bones. I don't know if you've seen this one at all.
I don't know what it is. It looks like a Burzum album.
It is. Yeah, to your point, just do it in black and white, and there needs to be a crow flying somewhere, and we're good. Right. But no, so this is I guess, doom album, but like it's called I think the artist, or it's a one-man project who's in Winterfellith, and he's calling it Northumbrian Doom, which may sound a little bit pretentious there, right?
Sure.
But so it's rooted in sort of English folklore. So in some degree, it is very much a folk record, and it's sort of choral arrangements as opposed to a singular lead vocalist sort of driving the vocals on this record. To me, it plays out almost like a drone record, in the sense that I would put this on and just kind of get locked into the group sort of melodic sort of harmonies vocally, as opposed to like listening to it hoping to find something like Candlemas or St. Vitus or anything like that, right? It's it's so much of like old English history driving the sonic character, as opposed to like a lot of the things that you're traditionally used to within Doom. So it's got the slow pacing and it's heavy, sure, but it that folk element, I think, is such at the heart of it. It kind of removes um, a lot of the traditional Doom sort of stereotypes. It was a very easy, perfect fall listen, right? Like if you're going to watch sort of everything fade into the winter, which is typically when I will have like a lot of sort of, I'll pull a lot of Doom records off the shelf during that time period. Um, it came out early in the year and was a great transition out of winter into spring for me. So uh, I still think that this is may almost be akin to some of the like metal adjacent we're talking about, just to how pervasive sort of the folk elements are.
Okay.
But if you wanted to just put this on and like listen to some sort of choral chanting with a little bit of metal, that's maybe a better way to sort of think of it. But yeah, group sort of vocals really
Like that
define
hell Gregorian chant kind of thing.
Yeah. If it's definitely in that, and it's in that vein. So, and that's why I say like almost like plays out like a choral drone record. It doesn't have like the punishing weight of a Doom riff necessarily, as much as it's sort of like this immersive experience. So, but once again, like kind of a unique record. And from a Winterfell is very much focusing on English folklore, but from a black metal perspective. So it was a way to sort of like shift genres, but hold on to sort of, subject matter in a way that I think was a bit unique and was a fun listen this year. So
cool.
Take Up My Bones by R.
Out of curiosity, how long is that record?
I don't think it's nothing like 2 hours or anything like that. Let me pull it up
So
here for
long,
you.
suckers.
43, a little over 43 minutes.
Okay.
And then they're all, the longest track's 9 minutes in the closer, but I guess there's a couple 9-minute songs. They're sort of slow plodding. You don't necessarily listen to this record for dynamic swings as much as you do sort of to let all the voices sort of gather around your room. And
right.
Yeah, it's a different kind of experience, but maybe potentially metal adjacent for our conversation.
Okay.
Go for it.
So, you mentioned earlier that was it Is it Rotten Tomb? Is that the name of it?
Yeah.
So that kind of gets your fix for a year. Every once in a while, well, I shouldn't say every once in a while. Typically, when it's very cold, I have some interest in seeing what the world of technical death metal has to offer. And so, like most years, I'll search. I'll check out like 20, 30 bands. I usually don't make it more than like 30 or 45 seconds through one of the songs. And so I check out like 20, 30 bands throughout the course of the year, but mainly when it's really cold, and see if I can find some tech death, because I'm just in the mood for it on occasion. And so this year's Surreption, and I believe, yes, this is a unique leader release. So I did find one this year, and this is tech death. And so, like, to give you an orientation, like, I don't like most tech death; it's just not for me. For some exceptions for me are, I think that the last couple of Deeds of Flesh albums were super interesting. I like Cytotoxin, the Nuclear Earth album. I think it was last year, might have been the year before. There's an album, and I don't know if it's Ophidian or Ophidian I or Ophidian One, but Ophidian with something that looks like an eye after it. And this is ultra catchy, like couldn't be more melodic, like hyper melodic tech death, but really like really, really memorable. And Archspire, I kind of like initially I was like, man, this singing when he's singing with the blast, this is terrible. And I kind of I turned the corner on that and grew to sort of appreciate it. And not the last Archspire, but the one before. I think there's a lot of really good songwriting. So eventually I can find, I don't need a lot of this stuff. As I said, usually I listen to it. I'm listening to 30, 45 seconds of some song and I'm out. And so what makes Surreption actually land? So they're from Sweden. This album is, I'm going to assume this album is Jord. And the thing that makes this work for me is, and it's probably the most important thing in tech death besides having good riffs, is knowing how to arrange. And a number of these songs land on their best riff. And actually, I guess it would be considered tech death, but I've never heard anyone mention but you one of the few albums in this genre that I regularly return to, which is that Skeptic album.
Pathetic Being?
Pathetic Being. So I guess that's tech death. It obviously has a lot of thrash going on, but I feel it's tech death, but it just makes sense. Like the arrangements make sense. There's obviously pretty technical riffing. And I might have checked out one other thing by them and not respond to it that same way. But this album is sort of similar to that insofar as, in general, one of the couple best riffs of the song is the one that they'll land on at the end of the song, and they will play it repeatedly. So it's not just it's not just riff salad, A to B to C to D to G to back to B to C with a development, changing key, adding a beat. Like it's some of that is going on, but I feel like they have a sense of actually what their best ideas are, and they progress to them. And that's, to me, a big difference between this Surreption album and like the other 20 death metal, technical death albums where I didn't get far. And I like the licks, and I listen to brutal death metal and all this sort of stuff. But say and I saw you on another show of yours, and you're talking about Wormed, like phenomenal players coming up with crazy stuff. But to me, there's no glue holding any of it together in terms of like memorable stuff or songs that land. Like I listen to that, and I'm like, I'd rather put on a free jazz album if I want to have this kind of wash of musicianship assaulting me. So they know how to end a song. They also, this is a lesson that could be taught the obviously incredibly technically talented drummer of Tool. They put the snare in a place where I want to hear the snare. And that's something that doesn't happen a lot of times with people get really technical. It's endless paradiddles and compound meter shit. And but sometimes like the snare should be where the snare should be to give your song any sense of momentum. That's why I listen to, and I'm not going to just rip on Tool. Like I liked that Anima album, or like they had a couple of albums that I think are decent. I don't think I've spun a Tool album in 10 years, but like they had some stuff that I think was decent. But one of the problems is like they have like 15-minute songs that feel like intros because the snare is never landing in the spot that drives the music forward. So my chop on this album, and it's certainly an affliction in the technical death metal world, is the vocals are really overproduced. They're not in every song, but like when you hear him going, he's growling and then he's yelling and then there's a high scream and then there's like some kind of harmonizer. Like I just want to hear the vocalist perform. Like this is where like the sedimentums of this world and the necros Christos of this world destroy this, because I feel like this is like in a way kind of compensating, because like you have these drummers who are like off the charts, like only jazz fusion drummers are playing at the skill set as like a tech death drummer. You have guitarists who are like sweet picking. They're probably sweet picking in their sleep. And so you have these guys, and I don't know, like if the death metal vocalist, who clearly it's like, how can he compete? The Archspire guy really does in some interesting ways. So I think sometimes the answer is let's just keep adding layers and layers and layers. But to me, it takes away from the character and is hiding it a little bit. So like the first song on this is not what I would recommend someone to check out. The verses are kind of rappy. You get some staccato stuff, some stuff. And I don't know exactly the dividing line for some of those vocals in deathcore. Certainly, I don't think I have an album in my collection that I would call deathcore, but maybe there's something that is deathcore adjacent. But you're getting riffs that have like every technique in the book. Like it's a palm muting, here's a sweep, now some tremolo stuff, now some kind of staccato gent pick, all this weird stuff. And that song doesn't stick that much, but it's all pretty good stuff. And then you get to like a run of songs that I think are pretty solid, with The Forever Born is the next one. And the licks are really winding, but the snare drum is just driving it forward. They play some cool 6/8 lick, then it mutates into something else, and then it lands on the best riff in the song, and they add some kind of cool, like, sounds like almost like a metal door being slammed shut to like augment the snare hits. It's really cool. And then there's a song called Prophet that has like a cool vocal refrain, which Under the Sea Lies the Prophet is pretty cool. Each Death More Hollow is pretty solid. Really, like most of these songs, the Chasm has a really good vocal refrain, You Will Never Be Alone. So this guy comes up with some good stuff. I may not like the production choices, though they're not constant. It's not like the whole album is like, like there's some delirious, like the delirious mantra part in the Behemoth song or whatever. Like he comes up with some tasteful stuff. Again, that song lands on its best hook. And the last song, which has a really good, like, memorable chorus. So that, and, like, I suppose, like, the bottom line for me to get into tech death, which most of it is stuff I don't like. Like, it's just not for me. It's like, do your arrangements make sense? Do they have momentum, or does it just seem like a bunch of parts put together to show off virtuosity? And like, do they feel like journeys? And because like maybe half of these songs, maybe 5 of the 8 land on either the single best idea in the song or the second best. And this is something that Skeptic album does. Like, the ideas that they play longer are the better ideas. Like, they see, like, and again, this is all, obviously it's hugely subjective. It's just their taste happens to match mine. Sometimes I'll hear like a song, I'm like, oh shit, that was the riff you could have played through the outro, and now you're on this other thing that isn't as good. And it's pretty soon I'll be talking about a band that does some of that. But again, like, I feel in a way like that a tech death album gets on my list. It's extreme, like, kudos to these Surreption guys that they got there, because this isn't for me. Like, in general, most tech death I hear I dislike, and this lands solid. And knowing, that Skeptic is probably one of the, let's say, 15 tech death albums that I regularly enjoy, you might want to check this out. It reminded me of that in spots. You'll have to accept that the vocals are produced the way they are, and maybe that'll be a deal breaker for you.
Yeah, it is harder for me. Like, but I would also say, like, I also feel I'm just like you in the sense that I want diversity from this genre. So I don't like hearing 100 bands that are playing in sort of small, sort of fractional differences from primary influences. Right. It feels like a breath of fresh air to get a band that has a little bit more of a technical side to them. And I'm making some degree of compromises in production quality, so on and so forth, just to try and get a different kind of instrumentation and songwriting style from a band in the genre. So I completely am with you there.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So next record for me. This is Trolldom. Let me pull myself here center stage. Okay. So I have to tell you, this is like the complete opposite of you see an album cover. There's one that I will show later that grabbed me. This is the opposite of that. This looks like the most nondescript, completely like whatever, boring black metal album cover, right? We got some stars, the trees, like it is. There's nothing about this that looks special.
Yeah, in 1997, there were 25 albums with that cover.
Right, and I don't. Oh man, I'm gonna mess up this name here. We'll work on my Swedish for this one. Av Gutar At, which translates to essentially, according to Google, by the gods. But this is a project by an incredibly prolific black metal artist who goes by Svarta Dobus. Okay, exactly. Okay. Yeah.
Is this his project or one of 30?
One of like 100. So probably Be a Hexamu is his most known, I would say, but this is somewhere between, right? Like I heard the first, what would I would say, let me rewind here. I casually listened to it, just scrolling through Bandcamp, and the opening synth line was like, okay, I want to know what unfolds. And what came afterwards was essentially a mix between Emperor and Evil Feast. Okay. So it's now they're labeled on Metal Archives when I went to go look them up as atmospheric black metal. I think that is a poor description because it's more symphonic, but it's not so bombastic and blown over with synth work that it would lead you to sort of be purely symphonic. So it walks like a middle line between the two of them. But this, I mean, I think there's 5 tracks all told. And it is, I don't know, the second release this year from the same project by the same guy who also released several other albums with band members. So I think this guy alone has contributed to like 5 or 6 different black metal records that have come out in 2022 alone. This is the one, I think primarily if this has given a better album treatment and he didn't have 5,000 other records going out this year, it maybe would have been given some attention. But the synth work on this is the perfect sweet spot for me. The songs sort of build in a way that it is like there's one interlude and then 4 tracks, which is great for this kind of atmospheric symphonic style. It's like all the best ideas are concentrated onto 4 songs and they let them develop. You have like a melody statement that will come in, fade away. It no longer really serves a major purpose until we close at the end. And then you get these other sort of larger pieces that are developing middle of the song. I probably listened to this black metal record more than, I mean, it's going to be close, but it came out of nowhere probably because of the album cover and the 20 other thousand different releases that came out this year, distracted from giving the proper attention that it deserved.
Right.
But I gotta say, like, I this might be my favorite black metal record that came out in 2022. I know I probably have listened to it just as much, if not more, and it just completely flew under the radar for all those reasons. So, if you want, I would say first and foremost, the kind of symphonic black metal that I'm into. That's the best way I would describe this. If you're tired of symphonic black metal that is so like over the top key driven that it drowns out the black metal aspect of it, this is going to be a nice relief. Which is usually like my sort of point of marcation on black metal records, like pagan black metal or symphonic black metal. I need it to first and foremost be a black metal record.
Right.
And then everything else afterwards can serve as like to aid in that sort of sound. But when they overcome essentially the metal side of it, it proves to be a distraction. I'm no longer interested, and I'm sort of not going to this kind of music for folk or for classical music, especially if it's on a keyboard.
Yeah.
I want it to be first and foremost a black metal record. Absolutely cannot recommend this one enough. I think the other record that he released under the Trolldom name this past year was given more attention. I think it's personally the lesser of the two, primarily because it's so blast beat driven that it pulls back on the better songwriting that develops with greater emphasis on sort of the atmospheric and symphonic qualities. So,
Are the drums real?
yes, yeah.
Okay.
He's talented musician and playing all the instruments, so it's a real drum kit. But I think he may have a session drummer who was brought in to help out on this.
Okay.
So yeah, let me just quick double check here before I bounce out from this record. So he's not listed. Oh yeah, there's a guest. Yeah. So Kevin came in to play drums.
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah, but I think on the record he's listed as LIK maybe. But yeah, Kevin is given album credits as a drummer, live drumming, but tremendous symphonic black metal record this year. And I would steer, if you were going to look at between the two records, even though this one probably has the less attractive album cover, probably the better songs are on it. So just so people know.
Yeah, I'm interested in checking that out. That whole atmospheric black metal tag is a weird, I feel sort of misnomer to begin with. First off, like the most atmospheric black metal albums to me are most of the creepy ones, which aren't the ones that have like metronomically perfect, quantized to shit, driving double bass and blast the whole time with really crisp modern production. To me, those are less atmospheric. And some of those I like. Like, I'm a huge fan of Fortress. I think their albums are awesome. Like, that is one of the all-time great black metal catalogs. But I don't think of that stuff as more atmospheric than, like, listening to an early Emperor album. I think of it as far less. So that tag, I think, is not good. I wish it was something soaring black metal, because there tends to be a lot of propulsion and a lot of, like, almost like empowering, enlivening keyboard stuff that's sort of lifting the view. It's like almost like uplifting black metal. So a lot of that, like, atmospheric, I find it less atmospheric. I find a lot of raw black metal more. I find the Moonblood, all the many Moonblood rehearsals and things like that, I find all that stuff much more atmospheric than a lot of the stuff described as atmospheric. But it's a weird term, because really all black metal is atmospheric to some degree.
Right. Yeah, it's I need more words here, sir, for you to be describing this appropriately.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the second of my metal adjacent releases, Siege Golem. not coming on a lot of lists. So this is dungeon synth, but with a black metal singer. So it's why it's a little more. I listen to a fair amount of dungeon synth. It's certainly for gaming purposes, but there are a number of albums I have in anyways that I enjoy to give my undivided attention. But this is from the Russian Federation. It's Siege Golem, or Golem, I believe. I think Gollum is the Lord of the Rings guy, and Enter the Golem is the name of the character. So this is it's pretty easy to describe. This is basically summoning style keyboard lines, and sometimes you get some almost like funk, like the Italian progressive rock bands, and one of my favorite bands of all time, Goblin. So you're getting melodies that seem like Goblin mixed with stuff like summoning, no guitars, and you get a black metal croak going along with it, and sometimes straight up dance beats. So it's a pretty puzzling mix. You'll get like creaky bass synth lines, and that like this, but also occasionally the energy level and the intensity gets to that sort of metal thing. Like the second song, a Great Landslide, it moves to like this contrapuntal part where they've got these like two melodies going in different directions, but there's a skank beat underneath it, programmed. There's nothing like acoustic going on with this other than the guy's voice. And it sounds a little bit like something Goblin would have done for the Phenomena soundtrack when they were starting to experiment with electronic drums. Dark Forest, Glass Orchestra. This is something that sounds like Mortice in that sort of world. You get some military snares, but then there's and then it kind of moves to a polka beat, so the polka thrash beat, and then you get this bendy lead line that sort of replaces like what a lead singer would do. The song titles are cute, like Elder Bug and Wide Hat Long Nose. One of the songs, Double Moon, has like the Profundo Rosso Goblin style organs, but there's a blast beat underneath it. So there is like sort of, if there were guitar in this would just be like a black metal thing, but it's like there's not guitar, and there you get some really like double bass beats with these grungy synth lines. And then the last song, the Golem Trail, you get a little bit like video game music with polka and like the polka beats and like the bass synth. So it's very high on quirk and charm. If you like, and that's a lot of the dungeon synth that I like. I listen to some that's more orchestral in nature, but I like it to be quirky, have the bit of the synth sounds of the early Mortice albums. But it also it's that early Mortice. It's really the summoning sense of melody, but a lot of Goblin. Like there's some funk going on here, like in the way Goblin is sort of like giving you the funky version of creepy. So if that sounds appealing to you, and I'm gonna guess 99.9% of the people watching this will be shaking their heads. But if you're into Goblin summoning and playful dungeon synth, Siege Golem is an enjoyable release.
Do you break out and dance when you're doing D&D? Listen to
I don't break out and dance when I do D&D. And this, by the way, because of the black metal screams and the number of like metal beats, like the double bass, the skank, the polka, and all that sort of stuff, this is a little bit too active for the kind of dungeon synth I put on when I play games. This calls attention to itself a little bit too much.
Okay. Here we go. So this is Orion. Speaking of album covers you see and you're like, I want to know what that is. It's entitled Equations for the Useless. And let me blow myself up here so you don't have to squint so hard. There we go.
Cool.
Super cool album cover. And they are right. Once again, I don't go for this meal too often, but every once in a while I need it. And as part of my sort of annual appetite, it's a stoner record.
Okay.
And what do you want to call it? They're an Italian band. This was recorded right before the lockdown in Italy when sort of COVID was breaking out in 2020. So recorded live in the studio, and for a stoner record has a tremendous amount of urgency, which is not necessarily something you would associate with the genre, but yeah, nothing necessarily groundbreaking about this sound. All sung vocals, so anyone who's into, it gets more, probably has more with Caius than it does with Electric Wizard, for example. But for me, this is always a summer kind of record. And there's probably something to be said about the way heat affects you and perceived exertion. But I tend to slow down a little bit in the summer. And this is like the perfect kind of grind record for me, where I can just sort of put it on and ease into it. What do you want to call it? It's like a dune buggy ride on Mars kind of vibe. One of those records where I would put on and it satisfied that part of my, craving. And because I don't listen to it very often, what surprised me and made it, sort of appeal as an end of year list is I kept on reaching for it, which is always a good sign. Like, even if you don't have the perfect way to sort of describe a record, sometimes you just can't put it away, even though, I can't just tell you why. But it kept on sort of calling me. So for a stoner record, I listened to this a bunch this past year and love the album artwork. We'll kind of keep them on my radar going forward as a stoner band that speaks to me and kind of gets it right. But plenty of, psych here as well. So if you like kind of a little bit of a proggy trip to your stoner stuff, but it's not over the top. It's not complicated. It's just the right mix of the formula that I was looking for. So Orion, Equations for the Useless.
Cool. Yeah, that cover looks a little bit like it could be a Mithras cover.
For sure.
Big. It seems very spacious.
You put a nebula somewhere in the background, it'd be perfect.
Yeah.
All right, go for it.
Cool. So my next one, you talk about one, that you reach for regularly. So this is Cryptworm, and without question, the album I listen to the most of anything that I'm showing today is this album, which isn't to say it's my favorite. It's coming in at number 14. But there was something that kept pulling me back again and again and again. And there's a reason I spent this amount of time with it. First off, like this recommendation and a number of things on this list I got from Melanie Loves Death Metal. I think her station is terrific. And in terms of someone really having, like a sense of what's coming out, death metal and black metal, she really does. And actually, I think your taste in death metal is good, but maybe her taste in black metal even better. So there are a number of things on this that I learned about from her station, from her program. This is one of them. So it's the name of the album is Spewing Mephitic Putridity. Not easy to say. And in terms of, I thought this band was UK, but I looked it up and it seems that the guitarist, singer, let's say the all-around dude, Tibor Hanvi, is Hungarian. So I don't think, I think maybe they met in England, and this is something I just looked a little bit deeper. And to me, an interesting thing about this album is I've seen this album actually has come up on a number of lists that I've seen. And everyone talks about this as a death metal album, a straight up death metal, old school death metal. I'm just hearing this album very differently. To me, this album is a gore grind album, but like groovy gore grind. Like, so there's a gore grind band, The Day Everything Became Nothing. I don't know if you know this band, and they're like this kind of mid-paced, like this mid-paced plodding groove. And to go like really mainstream for a moment, there's this band Helmet that was popular for like a day. And I remember I always liked their sound, but just thought their songs were a little bit too dull. And I probably bought that album. I definitely bought it at least twice, if not 3 times, thinking now is the time I'll have the patience for this, and I could never get into it. But to me, this album is like predominantly mid-paced. It is without question, of everything I'm showing, the thing I listen to the most in 2022. It's also the thing that is the loosest playing, and that's a bit of a euphemism in terms of like anytime a blast beat comes in, this drummer is chasing it. And a lot of the accents, like this seems like it would seem kind of recorded live in the studio, except that the guitar seems more on than the drummer. So I don't know if he just tracked and it was just like, here, I'm done. And I got their previous thing, which was an EP. It's actually a little bit better than this. It's certainly much tighter and feels a little bit more like death metal. But to give you like a sense of reference, because, you know, like I see people talking about, it's like, oh, it's old school, it's death metal, it's gross, and all this sort of stuff. Like the riffs, and this was and I remember seeing a review of this also on Grizzly Butts. Like there is and I think he referred to it as an angularity. Like a lot of the riffs, oh man, I'm on a man, like they're really like, it's not a melody that's going to stick with you unless you listen to it a ton of times, which is part of the reason I kept listening to it, because I like the sound so much, but some of it doesn't stick. And but also a lot, like is really down tuned. I feel it, to me, it reminds me a little bit of very early Carcass, like Recaputrefaction, but played with like a lot of kind of mid-paced rock beats, or, you know, and blast beats that are sort of swimming as they did on that early Carcass stuff. I think to me that, so the riffs are a little bit like that. They're a little bit Demi-Lich. They're a little bit Autopsy. And so Carcass I adore. This is probably my favorite death metal band. You know, I can say Carcass, Morbid Angel, and Necros Christos would be the Holy Trinity for me. But like, so, but this is like the Carcass riffs that are the transitions. These are not the landing moments and the things everybody remembers, or the things that fill Necroticism, Descanting the Insalubrious, my favorite death metal album of all time. This is not that. These are a lot of short, they feel like 2-measure or 4-measure riffs that are short and repeated. And because they're like, there's a bit of a groove to them, and some of the beats are groovy. To me, it feels a little bit like groovy gore grind, like, which isn't to say this is not at all a death metal release. I'm just like to me, it's constantly putting in that space. Not to mention song titles such as Disgorged Chunks of Life, Draped in Gore, and Spewing Mephitic Putridity. Like, so these are also leaning in that direction, but for whatever reason, everyone thought it was a classic old school death metal. I'm like, to me, this is like a sloppy and really loose gore grind release, but has a ton of character. The vocals, the Demi-Lich comparison holds there. They're really deep, and you'll get occasional wet highs. And so that's that, you know, like that back and forth that you get in early Carcass. And it's just a lot of these short, obtuse riffs. But it's this thing where like almost they're like with a couple of exceptions, like the opening riff in Disembowelment, Draped in Gore, that's like the best lick on the album. But with like, let's say 6 or 7 exceptions, this album is loaded with riffs. momentum and character, but don't really stay with you, or they don't stay with me as many times as I've listened to this. And like you'll get a slow-mo, you get pretty regular tempo changes. You'll get some occasional moments that have that like kind of D-beat crust punk sort of feel. And but like on track 6, the septic phlegm asphyxia, again to me leaning in the gore grind thing that no one seems to hear except me. They'll play around with it in a fun way. Like they'll have a riff where they're just adding measures to just make it longer. So they have this like elastic quality to the riffs. Like you've heard it, but now they're going to just play it for a couple of extra measures. And then like that thing degenerates into some ultra slow, gross thrash, like Seek and Destroy riff. And like in the title cut, the last song, which is probably the highlight other than 4, like the disembowelment, the track 4 and 8 are the 2 highlights. Like that tag is, they're playing in 4/4, but then they'll just add these extra measures, and then they'll play it again. Then they're just going to add more measures. And that last song feels a little bit more kind of committed death metal. But a lot of why I listened to this so many times is I kept trying to wrap my mind around it to kind of commit it to memory. And I now know pretty well. I really listened to this album a lot. As I said, like of new albums, this one probably got the most airtime. But some of it was like, I so liked the sound and I liked all of the movement, but it wasn't quite sticking. But I feel that's a little bit by design. Like this shit is, this is also my favorite album cover of the year without question. This thing is fantastic. But I think that's sort of by nature. Like it's this slimy, amorphous thing. And there's some landing moments and things you'll remember. And it's not like where Sedimentum have a pristine sound and fantastic playing, and then they give you a highlight lick. I feel this song this album is so much about like all of the changes. Like you get a lot of winding, like, now we're jumping to this part. Now we're jumping to this part. And it seems like they're having fun with it. Like there's a grooved, rocked out quality to it. But again, like it's really loose. And like I like as a not especially good metal drummer, like I don't it's not often I say like, oh, I actually could do much better than this performance. I could, and have performances online with my true metal band Realm Builder, and even that live Charnel Valley thing, which is recorded like one take with like a tape recorder. I don't like, I feel this is less tight than that. Maybe not the first Charnel Valley, but like, and maybe that's not the direction he wants to go. And I did look up this band, and this drummer is no longer the drummer for the band. So like, I don't know if he heard it and he's like, oh, I should tighten up, because I think this album has popped up in lists. Like this got some notice, due in no small part to the fantastic cover. But despite all of the endless old school death metal, blah, 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 like to me, this is like groovy gore grind with some death metal going on, and really like absolutely the loosest playing of anything I'm going to show. But fun. I look forward to their next thing. Though when I went back, I was like, oh, let me get the other thing they released and got that EP. I was like, oh, I thought that was actually a little bit better written. So we'll see how they develop, but this is an enjoyable album.
Is there any pitch shifting vocals there?
If there are, it's not the main thing that they're doing. It's not that kind of, that like obviously like going back with Carcass, it's like Steer did the deep Demilich voice and Walker did the highs, and then Ken Owen did the pitch shift stuff. So if there's pitch shift stuff here, it's like momentary, but that's not the main. The main sound is that deep Demilich thing with accents that are highs.
Awesome.
So an enjoyable thing. I mean, I really like gore grind. The last couple of years have had more, like this album this year didn't really have like a bunch of standout gore grind for me, but the previous years, like Pharmacist and Fluids, and like First Days of Humanity, there are a bunch of bands doing pretty good stuff in that genre. Just this year it didn't land as much for me.
Yeah, I out of the favorite grind records, I couldn't find a tremendous gore grind release this year. I agree there. Okay, so next one, jump into this. Talked about this earlier. Absent in Body, Plague God. So this is a record, came out, and it's essentially a combination of a few different bands. So I want to get this right. Amenra, Neurosis, and Sepultura. So it's basically, you could almost call this adjacent. It's kind of post-metalish. So sludge, industrial, and electronic is on this record. It's relatively short. It breezes right by, but super sinister. I mean, that the cover does a great job sort of giving you the vibe or the atmosphere on this thing. But for someone who's kind of getting into industrial music slowly, trying to find bands that will emphasize a greater amount of metal as the means to sort of enter the genre has been like is something I'm looking for. This year I picked up my first Skinny Puppy record, so slowly making my way there.
Right.
But this is absolutely scathing and does a great job sort of bridging like the guitar tone from sludge to a way that it creeps towards industrial. That's where it kind of gets like a post-metal sort of vibe. The third track on the record escapes me at the moment, but it's probably the most blatant sort of industrial influence, just because it has to do with like the syncopation between the vocal phrasing and the drums. I don't want to call it quite dancey, like maybe that be the right word to use, but there's a certain element to that song where it feels like it was coming from a totally different kind of structure as opposed to metal. But the first track, second track, and the rest of the album really are just punishing sort of post-metal sludge tracks. So I didn't hear a lot of sludge this year that I loved, but if everything that sort of met the definition, this probably did the best job. This year I want to mention, and I was kind of talking to Craig about this in the dugout. I had a little bit of a hard time bringing this record up just because of everything that Scott Kelly has gone through. So for people who don't know, who are watching, I think in August or September, Scott Kelly from Neurosis, longtime frontman, wrote a note about something on his Facebook page regards to abuse, essentially that he had for years been abusive towards his wife and family. So he was retiring from music, which is pretty disgusting and upsetting. And I wanted to, when I came on here, I was talking to Craig that I wanted to talk about this because it was like, in terms of things that I remember 22 for, it was definitely a factor. I definitely was affected in terms of how I remember Neurosis because early when I started getting into metal, they were a really important band for me. And I met Scott Kelly. Like I had a chance to actually go to a show and talk to him. And anyway, it was something that kind of I wanted to bring up when I talked about this record, just because of how sort of conflicted I was about it. For this channel, if anything like this happens, I think it's important to be completely transparent, that sometimes this gets kind of complicated and it's going to happen again in the future. I'm going to pick up a record and I will be sort of offended and disturbed potentially by, what an artist does, by their actions. And I don't think I have, perfect answers for anyone there, but if I didn't talk about it or I didn't mention it, I also kind of feel I was being dishonest. So for anyone who's watching this channel, and was curious about how I felt about it. I don't know, and I'm not going to necessarily throw away all my Neurosis records. But at the same time, if I'm going to be able to listen to them or pull them out with the same kind of memory that I have of the band, and anything that Scott was associated with, that's also been changed. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up and speak to that in mentioning this record. So anyway.
Yeah, I mean that's something if you're following. If you're a metalhead and you're following lots of bands, particularly if you go underground and you're following a lot of extreme artists, like what compels a person to make extreme music? What compels a person to be a metalhead? And for many, it might be just a pure love of music and the satisfaction that comes with making that, or creating music along the lines of the stuff that you grew up enjoying. Obviously, like, if you're dealing, particularly when you start dealing with something extreme, like there's like one Neurosis album that I have. I'm not that into that style of music. But there's definitely interesting stuff for that. Like, I don't have any sludge albums, and I don't even know that would be categorized as such. But yeah, it's like, I didn't like what John Schaefer did on January 6th. I'm not dumping all my Iced Earth albums. In his case, it's like he turned himself in and served time. So there's a little bit more like the story has a beginning and an ending. And, in the case of the Neurosis guy, and I don't know anything about him and couldn't have named him, like there's some people he damaged. So that lives in a different way than like you committed a crime and you turned yourself in and you went to jail. Like there's more closure there than like damaged human beings. So I understand why you're conflicted, and I think it is inevitable if you really are exploring lots of extreme underground arts and and whatever. It isn't even just music. Like eventually they're going to be like, you're going to hit that thing where there's someone like, ooh, you learn something about them privately, and and then you need to dig and see if it's true. Like I've seen an inordinate amount of stuff written about me that's completely not true. But just repeated from someone or whatever. So like you also, it's like your diligence. If it's troubling you, like go see if you can get the answer directly from the source and what that person has to say. And I don't know what press statements this guy's released. I don't know the situation at all. But like to some of that, you just need to find your own comfort level. But I agree with you. I think it's unavoidable if you are listening to lots of very extreme music or watching extreme movies or books. It's like what, like the people who this calls to, not all of them are going to be normally well-balanced human beings. And even if it isn't just the extremity of metal or underground horror movies or whatever it is, a part of it is just like, if you follow enough artists, like they're not all going to be good eggs.
Sure. And I wanted to be, I guess, transparent and forthcoming. I didn't think it would be honest to sort of withhold that or to skip it or to not talk about it, given this past year.
Sure.
So if it's a way that I'll, not everything that went along with my favorite records this year are always, positive stories. Sometimes it gets more complicated. And I just wanted to be honest about that. So
makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. You're up.
So actually a fairly good segue, not in terms of the personality behind the music, but in terms of industrial. So like you, I think I have one Skinny Puppy album. I got another industrial thing that Marty recommended. I think it's called Frontline Assembly, that I thought was quite a bit better than Skinny Puppy. Like I was like, ooh, the Skinny Puppy I got, I was like, this is pretty good, but long and not something where I felt like I need more of this, whereas the Frontline Assembly I thought was better. My only real experiences with industrial were I liked Ministry, when I was in college. I checked out some Nine Inch Nails albums and never got into. I didn't dislike them, but just sort of like the Helmet thing. I was like, this isn't interesting enough for me. Though I think Trent Reznor does some pretty good music for movies, and is a talented guy. This is the last of my metal adjacent things, and this comes from that excellent Deathbed Tapes label that I mentioned earlier. which is it's called Primitive Knot, and it is called metal. And so this is industrial metal. I probably about maybe slightly less metal than that. So I have one Godflesh album that I think is really awesome. Maybe it's called Street Cleaner. Yep,
that's a very famous Godflesh record. Yeah.
So that one is really good. I got 2 other albums by them, and I didn't like either of the others. I didn't think they were bad, just really uneven. And one of them was incredibly long. I'm like, I'm not enduring all of this. How much of it I liked to how much of it I thought was like not good. But that one Godflesh shop. So to me, this Primitive Knot is in that space. Reminds me of the industrial that I like, which, like, you know, if I'm talking about Ministry, Psalm 69, and that Godflesh album is obviously, this is very metal leaning industrial, but this is super. So this is it's from Manchester, England, and super easy to like. Like, this is industrial. The first time you hear it, you're gonna know you like the album, or I suppose if you don't like it, you'll know that you don't. But there's a lot of grit in the production, and a lot of the beat is, and this is probably different than some of the other stuff Rivet heads enjoy. A lot of the beats feel like there's obviously like a dance component to some industrial stuff, but these are in general slower. So you're getting the guitars are ultra dirty, but very rich. So it's not like some kind of thin, scathing black metal thing. It's really rich. The riff a little bit, like in the first song, so Abysmal Seduction. It's almost like a grunge riff, except it has this really biting harmonic pinch. And then the title refrain is really cool. The second tune, Priapic Bottles of Psychopathic Leadership. I'll also not say that quickly, but that has the funkier groove. That has a little bit more the dance beat, like the doom ba boom boom, doom ba boom 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 boom, doom ba boom boom, doom ba 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 boom. Like they're doing that sort of thing. And then the riff that's going over it in a way is a little bit like a slow thrash riff. And the vocals are almost like a steady narration. The guy's got a good voice for this. It's not like too clean, too pretty. He can hold the tune when he wants to, but sometimes, and I said, like, I'm new to industrial. I have a shit ton of power electronics, harsh noise, music concrete. Like, I got tons of that stuff. And so this reminded me a little bit, his voice reminded me a little bit of Mark Solitroff in like Bloody Minded, and that kind of like raw, commanding sort of presence. And so that tune's cool. The Consolation of Violence, you get like kind of a slow march beat and like this quick synth pulse. So you get like kind of the nice cool of like the slow and the quick. The Dark Backwards, you get a simple oscillating riff. And I forgot the hook, but it's sort of like actually something like Manowar uses in The Burning, where it's like bam pa 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 bam pa 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 bam pa 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 pa. It's just sort of oscillating between those two parts, and then the synth stuff in the background is pretty sinister. All good, and then this whole album. So you've got side A is like four 5-minute-ish songs. Side B, which there is one, despite how this looks, is one song called Metal, I guess Primitive Metal, and that song is 21 minutes, and and it sustains. So it's just like it's not like Yes is Close to the Edge or Pink Floyd's Echoes, which is the greatest song ever written, but it sustains itself for over 20 minutes, which is no like small feat. So you get like an intro, like the intro is kind of like this like squealing guitar. It sounds like something that's going to lead into a Chris Youn album It actually sounds just like the intro that leads into I think it's Bloodcraft. Where you hear like the dive bombing,
Yeah.
and all the scrapes, all that sort of shit. And then you're getting the oscillations with the front sit stuff. And then you get like his talking sort of progresses a little bit more to sing like, "What did you do with the metal force?" So you get that sort of thing, which is kind of like in that depressed Depeche Mode sort of thing. And then you get a little bit more sung with like, "Did you scream for me?" And he does like that refrain. But again, like the space here, it's like in terms of a real beat carrying it forward, you're 6.5 minutes into this song by the time that happens. Then you get like a heavy riff comes in where it's oscillating parts and a harmonic pinch. That's like 8 minutes in. And then that like guitar, like you get like military snare, like this really slow, like do 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 do. You can kind of see like the old man doing this sort of move, and it just pushes it, and then they bring in the harmonic riff, and it drops out at about 16 minutes to this beatless section and more of the guitars, and then builds up again. And I mean, it's like 21 minutes or so. I think that it like a better fade out spot would have been 17 minutes in, but nonetheless, man, this sustained my interest the first time I heard it. The entire album, and including this 21-minute industrial song. So when you're saying like you as a metalhead, you're looking for a way to get into industrial, you and I are probably about the same. It seems like we're similarly experienced.
Similar wavelength there.
And I'm pretty certain that this Primitive Nine, and I don't know if this is their best. I bought this album and then I got more by them, so it seems to be pretty well received. There's maybe an older album that's better known that is more popular, but I think that would be a good starting place, considering exactly what you said was exactly my experience getting into it, and it's immediately likable and understandable.
Okay, well I'll put it on my list here. Make sure I snatch that one up. Is it just a tape release?
I've only seen a tape for it. I prefer to get Deathbed Tapes is like, as I said, like I got more. There are like 4 things I showed from that label. I'd like to have this on CD. I think it would sound better. I'll show my audiophile segment some of my tape players.
We'll get that later.
Okay. Yeah, that's later, but it's available on cassette. Most of their things are out on CD, so that might happen eventually. But I learned of this band through Deathbed Tapes and was happy to support.
Sweet. Okay. So this is the last record I will show. Then I'll move to my CDs. Okay. So I don't know how much attention you will pay to the sort of metal or VC YouTube stuff, but at the end of every year, there seems to be like a metal tag where people will, there's a bunch of like questions or categories, and it'll go around in the VC community. People will answer the questions, talk about their favorite records. At the end of 21, this tag went around, and one of the questions that got asked was, what album would you like to see reissued this next year? And I picked the first 2 records from Negative Plane. I did not know they would be putting out a new record. So this is The Pact. Are you familiar at all with this band at all?
I've heard that album, and actually, speaking of like the artists that you are a little bit uncomfortable with, I saw them open for Destroyer 666 in Brooklyn in 2009, and I was like, man, this is just completely abstract. I had no idea what I was looking at, and I wrote them off. But I actually listened to and bought that album, and I don't have a verdict on it because there's a ton of stuff going on there. Like it's like a Black Album, it's like a King Diamond album and a Black Album. It's like there's a lot of very interesting music going on there. But when I saw them that time in like 2009 or whatever it was, I thought it was just a joke. Like it was just all reverbed and guys in hoods, and I was like, I'm not taking this seriously. This music, it just didn't hold. It didn't hold together as music. To me, it just seemed like free jazz reverb house, like without much going on. But that thing, whether you like that new album or hate that new album, there's an undeniable amount of musicality going on.
Yes. So to your point, probably the most polarizing aspect to this band was the sort of rippling reverb guitar work. That really, I think, people referred to it in the criticism where it sounded like surf rock gone black metal.
Bingo. And I
Yeah.
believe I said that at the time when I was with my man. I'm like, what is this like surfer? Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Or the dick
So,
or whatever.
so, I mean, there's probably a larger conversation to be had about American black metal that was at the same time trying to find an identity in its for itself, that broke away from, I think, what traditionally American black metal was like. If you thought about something like Profanatica, right? Like there was something very like strict, satanic, rigid about American black metal initially, and then you
Judas
get
Iscariot is the first one that comes to mind with that.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it was, but there was like in terms of contrast, right? So
Right.
I think I look at Negative Plane as a band that was definitely, I think, fair to call avant-garde back in 2000 and something, 2006. I think the first LP comes out. The Stained Glass Revelation that came out in 2011 was, we did that for Album Club, and that's easily, I don't know when you saw them live.
It was. I think it was 2009, but it might have been 2008.
It definitely heightened that. Like essentially, I don't know. There's probably multiple bands that you can talk about this with, but they proved to be really important for me. I really gravitated towards this because I was looking for something kind of interesting, and I like weird um, bands in general. But this record sounds like a band was able to sort of mature over the course of what was 11 years between releases. And when I look at some of their previous work, it feels like they're trying to grow into something, but at the same time doing so with a degree of, I don't want to call it clumsiness, but like looking for new artistic space to, explore, but haven't quite reined it in. Like there's a lot of interesting ideas, but they aren't sort of complete songwriters yet. And that's what I got from the past. Stained Glass Revelation sounded like first wave black metal that was trapped in the sewers of New York. Like the guitars were sort of would ring out and sort of would echo off the tunnels in the New York system, right? And but like grungy, doomy, in the same way that like Mortuary Drape comes to mind, kind of that Greek scene that you're talking about, or Italian scene from the sort of Mediterranean occultism.
Right. I thought a little bit also like when they with that amount of verb, I was like, I guess this is the next place you go with like that Zaster sound, where that was just like so much verb, and I thought that they were kind of continuing that legacy, or that aesthetic.
For sure. But that is reined in to a great degree on this record, and I personally feel that they sort of, if you want to use sort of geography here, I think they have left the sewer and are sort of haunting some sort of 19th century brownstone on this record. Like it's still urban, right? I think it's an important, New York plays an important role in terms of the identity of the band. And this record feels to me like it does not have the same level of, I don't know, like as dirty as the previous records were. They're a little bit cleaner, a little bit more precise. By no means like is it a super pristine record. It still sounds like kind of first wave black metal, but it's not sort of shrouded in all of that sort of polarizing guitar work. There's sort of softer sung vocals or sort of like background vocals that aren't quite lyrical, but they are to add like a melodic quality. There's the opening and closing song are the two major centerpieces. The first track I would recommend you check out. Let me see here. A Word to Stand 1,000 Years. I believe that's the name of there, but that's going to be like the make or break song. If you love that track, you'll love this record. If not, it's still going to be probably something too complicated for you or something that doesn't really speak to you. But I was incredibly excited to get another Negative Plane record and equally as impressed to see how much they've grown. I know Funeral Presence is another record that members from this band are involved in. And it's a lesson in like how much a musician or musicians can mature over a time period if they kind of get a chance to practice their skill set in other disciplines or with different projects. So a major highlight for me this year was I was happy to see this band return and to do so in such quality fashion. I know I talked a lot about the Troll Them record. This is getting a lot of love and praise.
Yes,
but deservingly so.
Yeah, that thing is well liked, and again, like for me, I don't know that it will land with me. I'm like, man, there's a ton of material to wrap your mind around it, and it's not like I love the sound or I love the ideas, but to me, it seems like 60% more King Diamond than what I remember from the live show. But I remember before I went to that show, I was like, who's this band opening up? And I checked out some stuff online. I was like, ooh, I don't particularly care for this. This is going to be a bit of a chore to sit through this. So definitely they have improved dramatically to my taste in years enough that I was like, ooh, I should get this and spend time with it. Then I listened to it. Maybe that last song is like 17, 18 minutes or something. It's a whopper. So I don't know, like, I think the compulsion to spend the amount of time to know that album well would be stronger or strong if I thought like the core ideas and sound was great. But they have definitely, I mean, to me, they've changed unrecognizably. I never would have known that was the same band that I saw with their hoods and bum, 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 like that thing that I saw, which is like, I felt like a put on.
Yeah.
You know, like what Ornette Coleman is coming out with his like plastic soprano saxophone back in the day. Like it was like that. Like, is this for real?
Sure. It's a polarizing band
Right.
for sure.
Yeah, the new album, you can like it or not like it, but it's like this is there's a ton of effort and creativity in there. So whether it gels or not, I don't know.
And for a lot of people, it may be a great place to start.
Right.
If you wanted to hear, because I think I could only imagine there's how many different bands have a similar narrative where it's like it's sometimes it takes a few records to get it right. Or to kind of fully realize who, what you want to be. So a high one for me. I don't want to spend too much time on that because I know it's been giving a lot of attention and a lot of love. So we can move on here, and I'm gonna, for this next segment, so I'm gonna pull my CDs out.
Okay.